Questions are, the MTA wants the city to provide volunteers to help with the social distancing efforts. Is that something you'll provide? And what are your plans for a possible influx of cars into Manhattan? And the other part of this is, with the city ready to reopen with a curfew, many commuters come into work during the early morning hours. And with places they are working at still boarded up or repairing damage, how are they going to get in there and get to work?
Okay, the curfew point, and say the first part one more time, Juliet. The first part of your question?
The first part, the MTA has asked the city to provide volunteers to help with social distancing efforts. So is that something you'll be doing? And what about the possibility that more cars are coming into the city?
Yep, thank you very much. Very good questions, Juliet, and I appreciate it. So, more cars. Yes, I do believe there will be more cars for a period of time. As I said, that's not our future. That won't work for our future in terms of congestion, in terms of health, in terms of fighting global warming. That can't be our future. But in the short term, do I believe people will use their cars more or for-hire vehicles more in the next few months of transition? Yes, I do. And we can handle that because we're going in phases. Obviously, there's so many fewer people moving around than usual. There's so many fewer people going to work. We can handle that in the short term. But the real point here is to get the MTA back up and running, to show people it's safe, to steadily increase the number of people who feel comfortable going on the subways and buses, obviously all at the same time continuing social distancing. And that's not forever, Juliet. I think it's really important to remind people this is a time-limited crisis. If we do our work together, all of us as New Yorkers, as one team, we will keep pushing back this disease and have the ability to open up more and more and get all of our transit options back to the fullest. So I believe we can make that work, but in the short term, we know that because phase one only involves certain types of work. Our prediction is between 200,000 and 400,000 people are going to come back to work starting Monday. But remember, right before this crisis hit, we had over 4.5 million people working in New York City. 4.5 million people working in this city. Highest level of employment in the history of New York City was back in January and February. Now you have a huge percentage of people working from home, and thank God they're still working, but working from home, I'm sure that will continue for months ahead. And phase one, again, is only one part of the economy. So we can handle the initial adjustments. Yes, we will work with the MTA. I want to be helpful to them. I know they've asked for us to help get some staffing together. Absolutely want to find a way to do that. We want to work collegially. We did something very good in the cleaning initiative together, the overnight cleaning. That's been working very powerfully. We want this to work as well. So we will help them. We're going to give the 1 million face coverings for free. And if we need to do more, we'll do more. We'll help them with personnel. I think we can all work together. I do want to say to the MTA, it is crucial to put those markings in place and give people clear guidance. New Yorkers, I've been watching, how many places with a supermarket, a grocery store, someone just put masking tape on the street to say, here's how the line should form. And people have been forming the line that way. They just need some guidance. So if we do that in the subway, if we do it on the platform, if we do it in the subway car, on the bus, I think we'll all be better off and it will help everyone. So we need the MTA to do that. And then on the curfew, Juliet, we're going to end it as per now. We're going to watch every single day, but the plan is Sunday night into Monday morning, 5 a.m. Monday morning, curfew comes off. I'd like us never to have to use it again if we can do things right. And then we go right into the reopening. So folks who are working on their stores right now to get ready for the reopening, they're going to be doing that during daytime hours. From 5 a.m. to 8 p.m., people are moving about as normal. That's plenty of time for folks who are working on their stores. I'm sorry that there'll be an additional challenge for those who might be having to do some repairs right now because of that bad couple of nights, but I know they can get it done. And remember who's coming up for this next phase: construction, manufacturing, wholesale, and retail that can do curbside pickup and pickup in the store. That combination, I think those industries will be able, and they've gotten a lot of warnings since we announced last Friday, the governor and I, that this was happening. They've gotten a lot of warning to get ready. New Yorkers are resourceful. I have great confidence people will be ready.
Next, we have Bridget from WNYC.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. I have two questions for you and for Commissioner Shea. First, we saw a lot of videos from last night showing the NYPD detaining people on the streets, sometimes for seemingly no reason, including essential workers and journalists. On Sunday, Commissioner Shea said there were about 6 incidents of potential police misconduct under investigation. I'm wondering what the number is now and if any of those officers are still allowed to police protests while under investigation. And then my second question is related to some of those people who have been detained, many of them for low-level offenses that could have been dealt with by summons. That means they're in crowded jail cells during the pandemic. I'm wondering what's being done to ensure the safety of those detained and why officers aren't consistently wearing face coverings.
Yeah. Okay, Bridget, I'm going to have to say I respect you a lot. We know each other a long time. That's a lot of questions, and they are very important and good questions, but I really feel like you went by the ground rule there. So I'm going to adjust your questions a bit. And please, to all the journalists, we're trying to be fair here. Just ask 2 real questions. It'll be good for everyone, and everyone else gets their chance. And then all of us need to get back to work, which we are doing nonstop here. No journalist should ever be detained, ever. Unless there's an absolutely aberrant situation where a journalist commits an illegal act, there should be no condition under which any journalist is ever detained by the police of this city or any city in the United States of America, period. It's in our Constitution, the freedom of the press. It must be honored. It should never be anything that compromises that. So anytime a journalist is in any way treated inappropriately, I want that investigated by the NYPD immediately, and I want to make sure there are ramifications for that. We absolutely believe in the right to protest. I think we've shown it and said it 1,000 times, and we'll continue to. Essential workers should not in any way, shape, or form be stopped from going to their work. That's very clear. If there's any instance like that, I want to know about it. I assume sometimes that's just based on a lot of activity and people trying to make sense of a complex situation. But the bottom line is, if you're an essential worker, you're not supposed to be stopped. You just have to clarify where you're going and why, and the police will understand that. Any officers who are under investigation will not be present during protests. I can say that very clearly. I've had this conversation with the commissioner. If an officer is under investigation, those investigations from now on are going to go faster. We're going to have faster results. But one thing is for certain. If an officer has done something that has led to serious questions about their conduct, they're going to be pulled immediately away from protest duty while that discipline is determined. I want to see it determined quickly. I want it to be fair to all involved, but it must be quickly. And then obviously, we must do everything safely. So I understand the complexities everyone is facing, but I would like to see every New Yorker with a face covering on at all times. I don't like it, you don't like it, it's no fun, especially when it's hot out. Everyone needs to have a face covering on. Everyday New Yorkers, protesters, police, everyone needs to have a face covering on. And we want to make sure everyone is safe, and people will be detained if they do something inappropriate. And we saw in the last few days people do things inappropriate, people do things violent, people attack property, attack police officers. Anyone who does that is going to be detained. Anyone who's out after the curfew and cannot prove that they are there for essential work reasons is subject to being detained. We're going to follow through on those rules. That's the way I've made clear to the NYPD. I expect people to handle things, but I want to make sure everyone's safe. So we certainly will look at, I'll ask First Deputy Mayor Fullahan to follow up with the commissioner on the situation with anyone who's detained to make sure we're putting the right measures in place for the health and safety of all. Commissioner, you want to add anything?
No, I think you hit everything. The only issue that was a long question that I didn't hear was the summons versus arrest. You know, wherever appropriate, we issue summonses in lieu of arrest. We've obviously done a lot of both summonses and arrests. And then on the point of the the only thing I'll add on the point of the press, it's doing the best we can in a difficult situation. We 100% respect the rights of the press. Unfortunately, we've had some people purporting to be press that are actually lying, if you could believe that. So sometimes these things take a second to, maybe too long, to sort out. I could think of a case with the Wall Street Journal recently. I was just made aware of yesterday. They wrote me a very nice letter, and I'll be calling them just to apologize. So we're not perfect. We do the best we can in the situation, and whether it's essential workers or press, the reality is, though, as the mayor said, chaotic situations at times. A lot of people obviously know what to say, and they're lying at times. So sometimes these things take a few moments to sort out. But if we can improve in areas, we'll improve.
Next, we have Gloria from New York 1.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to ask you, I know that we saw a big decrease last night in the number of incidents, in the number of looting incidents, but I wanted to see if there's anything more you could say about who these people are. A lot of the video shows young men, what appear to be groups of young people. And I want to know what happened to the work that the NYPD was supposed to be doing to engage with young people. What can you give them as hope as we go into the summer season with a possibility of a budget that might cut education and programs? And my second question, Mr. Mayor, is about these calls that we're hearing about defunding the NYPD. Both of my questions are sort of related. Do you think it's time to take a second look at how the NYPD is funded, and that there needs to be more of an emphasis on young people and making sure that they can safely get through this summer in the next couple of months?
Yeah. Thank you, Gloria. So, I'm going to just start with a little remembrance that it's interesting. Commissioner Shea and I did not know each other in the year 1991, but our lives were on a parallel track. He joined the police force and was stationed in the South Bronx, and he, for the first time, experienced policing in an incredibly difficult atmosphere. It was one of the years over 2,000 murders. I was working here at City Hall, starting out my work in public service. And right around then, at a point where the city was so violent, and I give a lot of credit to Mayor Dinkins, I give a lot of credit to Speaker Peter Vallone. They got together and they said, we've got to do something different. They said, we need to both increase the number of police officers on the street, and we have to focus on youth programming. The initiative called Safe Streets, Safe City. And Safe Streets, Safe City, then in the early 90s, which required the support of the state legislature, and it required funding, did both those things together, Gloria. Increased the police force and created the beacon programs that had such a big impact in terms of giving young people a positive opportunity. The plan was called Safe Streets, Safe City. The subtitle was Cops and Kids. The truth of that in the early 90s is still true today. On recent weeks, I've had the opportunity to speak to Mayor Dinkins and speak to Speaker Vallone, two exemplary public servants. Their contribution is often forgotten, and it shouldn't be, because they helped set us on the path to becoming the safer city we did over the following quarter century. But I tell you this for a reason. I think there's been a lot of police leaders, a lot of police reformers from within the police profession who long ago came to the conclusion that a focus on youth was the only way forward. A positive focus on youth was the only way forward. I believe in that fundamentally. And that investments in youth programs are just as crucial to public safety as what we do with traditional policing. So we have to figure out how to do both. Now, over these last days, we've asked a lot of the men and women of the NYPD. We've asked them to do extraordinarily difficult work while many of them have been put in danger, and we've asked them to show consistent restraint no matter what is said or done to them, and they have done that overwhelmingly. And again, anytime anyone does not live up to their oath or does not live up to the standards of the profession, that higher calling, we are going to make sure there are appropriate consequences. But I really want to put things in perspective. 36,000 men and women, the vast, vast majority of whom have done exactly what we asked of them in recent days. I want to thank the men and women of the NYPD for that. Now, how do we move forward? Commissioner Shea, I said we started around the same time. He said some things in the last months about youth-focused policing that were profound. He has said things in his tenure that, if you listen carefully, are about entirely reshaping the approach of policing, which has already been altered deeply in the city because of neighborhood policing, and going even farther, with a focus on helping young people. He has said this, he laid out the plan, and this plan would have been deeply implemented right now had it not been for a global pandemic. But the plan is clear. NYPD, through neighborhood policing, deep in communities, talking with young people, talking with their families. If a young person starting on a difficult path or an inappropriate path, move in cooperatively with the family, help get that kid the support they need, whether it's mental health services, whether the kid needs help at school, whatever it is. Family needs support. The idea is proactive, preventative, positive. That's what Commissioner Shea has laid out, and that is the future of policing in New York City, and that is what we will be able to get back to as soon as we can take a few more steps forward in fighting back this pandemic. So that's where we're going to be going. The hope for young people, and I showed you the photos of those young people in the Bronx. Gloria, you and I can talk, Commissioner can talk, but that's the actual on-the-ground reality. Young people who are our hope, who already are showing such responsibility, such ownership of their communities, we need to foster that and support that. We have a challenge in these next weeks as we go into the summer, both how do we physically do it while we're still dealing with the pandemic, and also how do we pay for it? We're in the worst fiscal crisis this city has seen in generations. The answer is we need the stimulus in Washington, which, Gloria, I don't know if the stimulus is more or less likely because of the events of the last few days in this country, but if anyone in the White House or the Congress is paying attention, this is even more of a reason to have a stimulus, because people are hurting. They're hurting because of injustice. They're also hurting because of poverty, because of economic injustice as well. So the stimulus would allow us to move forward and find the right way to support our youth, even with the healthcare restrictions. We need that capacity to borrow from Albany. It's made all the more pertinent by the events of the last days. We're going to work for both those things in the month of June. If we get that, we're going to be able to do a lot more for young people. If we don't get that, we're going to be in a horrible, horrible situation where we're going to be having to cut back city government across the board. And that's not going to help anyone. So, Gloria, I am purposeful about fighting in Washington for the stimulus, fighting in Albany for the borrowing capacity, only to use as a last resort. But we've got to have some resources of some kind, or else we will not be able to provide services and we will not be able to support our young people the way they deserve. So, final point I'd make, I understand, I don't mean to make light of this, but I'm reminded of the song Imagine by John Lennon. We played it at my inauguration. I think everyone who hears that song in its fullness thinks about, what about a world where people got along differently? What about a world where we didn't live with a lot of the restrictions that we live with now? But we're not there yet. We are making a lot of progress, I truly believe. I believe the protest movements themselves, the peaceful protest is the essence of how we make progress. The reforms made within the NYPD are progress, deep progress. But for folks who say defund the police, I would say that is not the way forward. At some point in our history, we may be in a very different situation. But right now, and I use that analogy from the early 90s, having a police force that is able to keep everyone safe and able to engage at the community level, having a police force strong enough to do the work of public safety, but also the work of building community with people and healing. I think that's necessary for now. So I understand the impulse, but I think the impulse misses the reality we're facing right now. And look, I am hopeful we can bring these strands together, and I'll conclude with this point. I'm hopeful we can bring these strands together powerfully. I really am. We need a different approach. We need a host of additional reforms in policing. We need people to believe that there will be transparency, that there will be actual discipline and consequences when someone does something wrong, and it will be swift. We need to make sure the right police leadership is in the right place in our communities. We have a lot of things we can do differently and better, and we will do them aggressively. And we need to get to Commissioner Shea's vision of youth policing, because that will be transcendent. That will take us to a whole nother place. And we can do that. So all of these things, I think, can be brought together in a very, very positive manner if we have some resources to work with. If we don't, Gloria, it's a very, very difficult situation. But I'm going to keep believing in New York City, believing in our people, believing in the NYPD. I also believe in community leadership. One of the things you've seen the last few days is community leadership coming forward, owning the space, owning their neighborhoods, rejecting violence, rejecting looting, rejecting anyone who wants to attack officers or property. The Cure Violence movement, I think, is one of the most hopeful things we've seen in this city in recent years. People from the community, including some people who had lost their way, who become change agents, who become peacemakers, mediators, community voices. That's the future of this city.
Next, we have Julia from the Post.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Commissioner Shea, and everyone else on the call. First question for the mayor and the commissioner. Could you give us a detailed sketch of the looters over the last couple of days? Where are they coming from? Kind of what their size is? Are there different groups? We heard from a high-ranking law enforcement source that they're using stolen out-of-state U-Hauls to transport the pilfered merch. And then secondly, for you, Mr. Mayor, I'm wondering about the impact of the looting over the last few days on the city. Some small business owners, including some in the Bronx, are saying that the pandemic in combination with the damage and theft will force them to close forever. The downtown shopping districts say it will delay their reopening. We saw Saks spending $16,000 to protect their store with armed guards and razor wire. What's your message to those business owners, and do you regret your administration couldn't protect them better?
Julia, I believe that all of us in City Hall, everyone at the NYPD, used every tool that was right to use in this atmosphere and looked at the big picture of what happened in this city and in this country from Thursday night through Sunday night. Again, up until Sunday night around 9 p.m., no serious instance of any looting in New York City, even if we saw it elsewhere. Things changed on Sunday night. We made an adjustment for Monday, saw something really troubling Monday night, made a much deeper adjustment, and you saw a very different reality on Tuesday night, and that's where we're going to hold. So I believe that for all of us who actually do this work, who are here at the front line making these decisions every single day, I believe we acted on the information we had, made adjustments. Of course, we would have loved to have been able to see what was going to happen and to have the intelligence information to know that something like that was going to happen in a way we could act on even earlier. Of course. But I look at the big picture all the time. And I think it's hard. Honestly, seriously, I don't blame anyone who's looking at the day-to-day or the hour-to-hour. That's very human. It's certainly the reality that media has to deal with. I understand that. My job is not to think just about the day-to-day and the hour-to-hour, but to think about the whole city all the time, today, tomorrow, the future, and here's what I see. Starting on Thursday, we had a national crisis, a historic and painful national crisis. Our job was to keep the peace in the city. Our job was to ensure that there was no loss of life. Our job was to ensure that even if there was tensions between police and protesters, there would be peaceful protest honored and respected. Our job was to show people that policing would be restrained, but still effective. And then when we saw something that we really don't have a lot of history of in recent generations in this city, that organized looting, then it was our job to figure out strategies that will work without forgetting about everything I said previously. We were not going to miss the fact that we still had to keep a peaceful dynamic in the city. We still had to respect the views and rights of people expressing themselves. We could not create a counter mistake, trying to solve one problem, creating a new problem. We had to strike a balance. Commissioner Shea and I talked about this incessantly. And as I said, First Deputy Mayor Dean Fullahan, thank him for all the work he's done. I want to thank Chief Terry Monahan, Chief Fausto Pichardo. We have all been talking constantly and making those adjustments. That's what leaders do. I'm confident that as we gain more information, more intelligence was gathered, more sense of the specifics that you referred to at the beginning of your question, that we saw the pattern of what was happening, that the adjustments were made. Last night showed me something very different. We're going to stay with this strategy through the week. I want to emphasize the vast majority of people who have been out these last 6 days have been peaceful. A small number of people aim to do violence towards police, particularly that kind of anarchist group, and some of whom, as we said, come from outside. Certainly many of whom are protesting in communities that they're not from. And then a organized group of criminals doing things like looting for pure financial gain, pure criminal gain, nothing to do with protest whatsoever. No cause, just plain old crime. And they will be dealt with. Final point on the small business, and then we'll turn to the commissioner. I feel for every business that has gone through these last few days. We want to help businesses come back. I talked to the store owners in the Bronx. I said, we're going to find ways to help you. And again, respectfully, Julia, for all the folks who spend a lot of time trying to tear down New York City, I'm not going to let you tear down New York City. So you can try, but you will fail. Those store owners want to come back. Every time you want to tell the story of what's wrong with New York City, I'm going to tell the story of what's right with New York City. And every time you want to ignore the everyday working people of the city who believe in the city, who fought through stuff you couldn't even imagine in the South Bronx in the 1980s. And I talked to people about it yesterday. I talked to the borough president. I talked to the councilman. I said, I've asked, we had a group of community leaders in a room. I said, how many of you were here in the 80s? People raised their hand. I saw the South Bronx in the 80s. What they went through night before last was horrible, but they went through 100 times worse and came back from it because they're that tough, they're that resilient, they care about their community, they will come back. So the vast majority of those small businesses will come back and we will help them come back. Anyone who can't, especially because of the blow of the coronavirus, it saddens me deeply. But all of this comes from the coronavirus creating this dynamic for all of us, and we're all going to have to find our way through as best possible, and the city of New York will do all we can to help them. But if you're asking about the will of the business owners to come back, the vast majority have the will to stand and fight, I assure you. Commissioner? On the composition, on the composition of the looters, what you've learned about the looters in particular.
Yeah, Julia, what we've seen over the last 3 nights is, again, people taking advantage of a situation. I think I draw a line of distinction between the protests, overwhelmingly peaceful, and some people trying to disrupt that and cause mayhem. And then when you get into the looters, I draw a distinction between the protests and the looting. These are people taking advantage. We've seen a lot of people, as you mentioned an incident that I would consider isolated with the U-Haul truck. That did happen. We see a number of vehicles to transport stolen property, to scout locations out, to transport people to commit these crimes. So vehicles is not rare. The U-Haul truck aspect is more of an aberration. And we also see a lot of people just peeling off, using the protests as cover, and then peeling off and, unfortunately running around and doing some looting. In terms of where those specific people are coming from, they tend to be from New York City. We've seen a lot of people from Brooklyn. We've seen a lot from the Bronx coming south to Manhattan. We've seen some looting a couple nights ago in the Bronx. There was a number of Bronx homegrown residents participating in that. And that's really what we've seen.
Next, we have Tom Winter from NBC.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Reviewing your transcript from Monday, you said a police officer should lose his badge and gun for pointing his gun at a protester. You said the video was, quote, unacceptable. Later video came out that showed seconds before the video that everybody was commenting on Monday, his commanding officer, a lieutenant, was attacked with a brick and fell to the ground beside him. Have you reconsidered your statement, and do you want to apologize to the NYPD?
Tom, I want to get all the facts. What I saw was very troubling. In the middle of a crisis like this, the last thing you want to see is a gun being pointed at protesters. But I believe there's always complexities to these situations. The commissioner and I have talked about it. He's seen more video now. I know we're going to talk about that in detail. I want to understand the whole picture. If I ever say something and then learn more and believe what I said was wrong, I'll always acknowledge that. I'll always say what I really believe is true. There's also a formal investigation process by the Internal Affairs Bureau. There's a formal disciplinary process with due process. But I have said throughout these days, I respect the men and women of the NYPD. I respect the work they're doing. I'm supporting it in every way I can. I'm talking to the commissioner all the time. Every strategic decision we are making jointly, and there's been tremendous consensus. If I see something troubling, I'm going to say it's troubling, but there's still, regardless of what I say, going to be an objective process to determine what's right and wrong.
Next, we have Rosa from the city.
Hi, I have two questions. One first from my colleague Yoav, who has a story on this today. Mr. Mayor, if you could speak to, be specific about the steps that you're going to take to improve internal discipline at the NYPD. You said you're going to make it faster and better, but specifically how and why hasn't the NYPD fully implemented the 13 recommendations they committed to in February of last year? So that's my first question. My second question is for Mitch Katz and for the mayor. Are you modeling for a bump? In your modeling, do you see a bump, a spike after reopening? And what kind? And given that we're sending, you talk about
Rosa, I'm cutting you there, no disrespect. Again, guys, respectfully, two questions, two real questions, not two 12-part questions. So I'm going to just stop it right there. It's enough. We are absolutely modeling for multiple scenarios, Rosa. The problem is, and I think everyone would agree with this, the modeling to date, globally, nationally, state, local, has been really uneven because this is such a multifaceted crisis and medical science doesn't understand this disease and there's so many moving parts here. I have to say the modeling has often been off base, so we're doing our best with the modeling, but unquestionably we are worried about the potential for any kind of resurgence of the disease. And I'm worried anytime people start to come in contact with each other. But on the other hand, these numbers show the disease has been beaten back so consistently for so long now, and people in the city take it so seriously, and they've done so much to beat it back. And on top of that, the test and trace, as you heard earlier, is coming on very, very strong, which is going to be a real strategic change to have that much more ability to reach people and deal with them and make sure they are not spreading the disease. So yes, we are prepared. If we see anything, what I've talked to Dr. Katz and Dr. Varma and Dr. Barbeau, we've all talked about the fact that this doesn't happen